I was talking to some of you guys about earlier, like data journalism is a bit of a buzzword in the media at the moment. It's kind of one of the ways that we think of the media being disrupted. And yeah, there are companies like the ABC and like Fairfax who are putting resources into telling stories with in some new and different ways. So, I mean, collecting data is really, one of the fundamentals of journalism. But I guess when we're talking about data journalism, we're talking about how we can, make use of it in an interesting way, that particularly, using digital technologies. So tonight we're going to hear from a couple of people who are working in mainstream media organisations and who are trailblazing, a way for data journalists around them. So Kristen Tilley is a journalist on the ABC's digital interactive storytelling team here in Brisbane, and Felicity Caldwell is the state political reporter with the Brisbane Times. I'm Rosie Ryan, and I am on maternity leave at the moment, so I'm spending most of my days singing nursery rhymes, but before that I was deputy editor of RN Online. So I thought we could start with hearing about how you guys got into digital journalism at all. And so, Felicity, you've come from newspapers. What do you like about working in the digital space?
There's a lot I like about digital. My previous editor actually asked me when I made the move over to Brisbane Times, she's like, but do you miss newspapers? And I was like, not really. There's an immediacy to stories. I think it's got great benefits for breaking news, like radio. If something's happening, you can update it. It's also really, you can do a lot of interactives and get people to see a story in a different way. You don't have to just tell a story with text and numbers. You can put sort of interactives in there and photos and videos, and it's great.
And Kristen, I guess you're a bit like me in that most of your career has been spent doing stuff in the digital space.
Yeah.
What do you like about that?
I think I have done a bit of work in print and broadcast, and I think compared to those platforms, I just like that the formats aren't set. As you said, that everything like for breaking news and for people getting it on their phones and all of that, that's absolutely, I think, the best way to go. But also, I like that, particularly in the kind of stuff that we do, you're reinventing things all the time. With a lot of the other platforms, I found that you were it was obviously really busy, and there were really kind of really tough days at work, but when it came to it, at the end of the day, everyone kind of knew what they had to do, and you were kind of slotting into a role in that very kind of structured zone. Whereas I like the freedom of digital, what it provides.
So we were talking a little bit about some of your early experiments in data journalism. So Kristen, you were talking to me about that opinion poll story that you worked on, which was probably a good 5 years ago now. So what inspired you back then to go, okay, well, I need to tell this story using more than just paragraph after paragraph?
So that one was a page for the ABC's federal election website in 2013, and the idea behind that was that I got my problem with the reporting of opinion polls is that it's often just kind of they report one poll and maybe the poll before it and say there's been a 2-point change or something like that, and it's not very meaningful. So I thought it'd be good for people to be able to see the trends over time. And I also knew that people were searching for this kind of information during the campaign as well. So we got, I think it was Nielsen and maybe Morgan and Gallup, obviously News Poll, and charted them using Data Wrapper, charted them over the last term and put them just all on one page and updated it through the campaign as well, so people could see, the trends in all of those polls on one page. Yeah, so that was pretty, in terms of visualisation, it was pretty kind of basic by today's standards. But I think it was one of the most popular pages on that site, obviously up until results night, but it served a purpose as well for people.
Yeah. And what about you, Felicity? What kind of inspired you to start dabbling in data journalism?
Data, so mostly I write about state politics these days, and there's always questions on notice coming through, or different aspects, or a politician's telling you that more people are using the trains and something like that. So I think a lot of my early stories were around that time when Queensland Rail was having all its troubles with trains not running when they should, and not enough train drivers. So one of my earliest stories was around train cancellations, and there was a question on notice that said this many trains were cancelled. So we use Infogram at Brisbane Times. So I got my boss to she showed me how to use Infogram, and then I got all the questions on notice, which are all, it's not an Excel spreadsheet, it's a PDF, typed it all into Excel, imported that into Infogram, and then I don't know if anyone found it useful at the time, but I found a really interesting way of showing these are the lines that had the biggest cancellations, these are the lines that are least affected, and then you can sort of click through, and then that way, depending on which train line you catch, you might get a better picture of
your chances of
your chances of getting a train. Well, if your train's been cancelled, you probably knew how annoyed you were in October 2016.
Yeah. And so what is it about like a story now that sort of, you know, makes you think, oh, this is something that I've got to do with like a data treatment as well?
I try and think of, it's sort of generally in the back of my mind. Is there some sort of data, or is there some other way that we can visualise this? We don't want someone clicking on a story, spending 10 seconds in there and hopping out again, and we don't like clickbait at Brisbane Times. So we want to draw people in. It's a great story. There's lots of aspects there. There's a photo and a video and data. So other aspects that might make me think we need some sort of data journalism sort of in there would be if there is literally a lot of data in the story. If you're trying to tell a story, you're saying it's up 10%, it's down 10%, there's 2,000 of that, 2,000 of that, no one's going to want to read that story. You're going to be sitting on the bus trying to read it. It's the most boring thing in the world. So yeah, just trying to visualise information really.
It's a lot faster for people if they can just look at something and get the gist of it without having to wade through all the sentences with figures in it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, are there certain particular kinds of stories that you think, you know, this needs a data treatment?
All the time. Yeah. Usually if it's a story based on a report, you know, there'll be numbers in there somewhere and you can go and get them and and put something visual into the story. But a lot of the kind of more popular stuff that we've been doing is usually that we've compiled our own data sets for it as well. So we're kind of, at the moment, what we do, we don't do so much kind of day-to-day news, but we would look at most of the stories we do and say, is there a data element to this, and can we visualise it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Felicity, some of the stories that you do involve you going out and actually collecting all that data as well, right?
This is something I decided to do and then immediately regretted with it. So during the abortion debate, it was really heated and there were a lot of opinions and thoughts flying around. And in the office we thought a lot of the MPs were going to get a conscience vote. We thought, well, how are they actually going to vote? So I decided to contact it was 89 MPs at the time, contact all of them and say, how are you going to vote? So this is obviously a really touchy subject as well. A lot of people have very strong opinions or they don't want to share their opinions. So I didn't get a great success rate from my initial email. So I went back and emailed everyone who hadn't responded, and then everyone who sent me back a pro forma party line response. I went back to all of them and got new responses. And then used that to create a table, and then you could search your MP, see what they think. But some of them it took about 3 times, and I had to call their office, and then I had to start texting them. But
that's when you regretted it.
Yeah, started to really regret trying to chase this thing, because this wasn't a data story I was just doing for 2 weeks. I was doing about 3 stories a day at the same time as chasing all of these people. But it's a great way to get people's phone numbers when you collect them, ask them about abortion.
Yeah.
But
and so how do you choose what tools you're going to use, or how you're going to lay out something that you're working on?
Well, for me, it would probably be to do with the complexity of the data that I'm looking at. I'm lucky enough to have an awesome designer and some really great developers on our team as well. So if it gets to the stage where I think it's beyond my capabilities for producing some kind of chart or some kind of visualization, then I have some pretty good resources to call on. So
Yeah.
that's when I'd kind of get the guys involved and see what else we can do.
Yeah, and is that the
Yeah.
same with you, Felicity? You find you have to bring in like a bigger team when you do have the...
Yeah, I've had that experience as well. I'm mostly self-taught in the data sphere. I haven't done a lot of training, so I taught myself most of my Excel skills and pivot tables, and then we use Infogram if we're going to embed stories, embed graphics. I did work on a project recently that was much bigger, and Sydney and Perth and a few other places have done similar projects around census data and where people are coming to Brisbane and leaving Brisbane or Sydney. Since that was such a big project, we enlisted the help of some people down south who have magical visualization skills, and they put as Sankey diagrams, which I now know what they are. So yeah, it is.
What is it?
Sankey diagram. It's like
Yeah.
this thing, and it kind of goes small, it gets bigger again. You could probably explain it better than me.
It's sort of distribution, and Anthony Green did one today for distribution of preferences from
Yeah.
one candidate and where they go and then where they flow through.
I think I actually know what you mean.
Flows through to the other place. Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, at the ABC, I guess, you know, you've got like a resource to draw on with your team. Do you find, you know, do you find that you all see eye to eye on like how to tell a story visually, or?
No, definitely. There's always a lot of talking about stories. There's a lot of work that goes into the finished product. Early on. We all have our opinions about how something should look, but obviously Ben, our designer, is the expert on that. So it's a collaborative process, but he does the design for it. So in the end, we would kind of defer to his expertise in that. But what I've noticed with what we do is that there's definitely a lot of discussion beforehand on how things should look and how things should work and what the main point of the story is, and yeah.
And Felicity mentioned earlier that she's mostly self-taught.
Yep.
But you were telling me that you've done some courses online. Do you want to tell people about some of those courses? Yeah,
there are some really great courses online, and they're free, particularly for journalists. The Knight Centre in the US has some really great free courses. I think the URL for them is journalismcourses.org, so all one word.
Is that on edx.org or?
I think that's slightly different. I think EDX, I did a course through Berkeley, which is connected to EDX, and that's more kind of universities, I think, whereas the Knight Centre is an independent organisation for journalism. But EDX has some great stuff as well. So I'm doing a course through the Knight Centre at the moment, which is being run by Alberto Cairo, who's a real legend in the data viz world, and that's currently going on, so you could definitely join that, and it's free. And even if you haven't got time to do all the exercises, there's a lot of readings and things, and you definitely learn a lot pretty quickly through that.
So is that Knight with a K?
Yes, sorry, I should have said,
Cairo?
Yeah, Alberto Cairo. Yeah.
And so what sort of tools have you, could you tell us some of the tools that you've learned to use through those courses?
I've tended to work with Python just because I've started off with it and it seemed to make sense to me. Mm-hmm. So I did a Python for Data Journalist course through the Knight Centre last year, run by Ben Welsh from LA Times. So that introduced me to basic Python coding for data and something called the Jupyter Notebook, which is an interface for data analysis and using Python, so you get to use various libraries through that as well, learning all the commands for sorting through your data, and I've used that now for several stories. And then
Sorry, what was that tool?
it's called Jupyter Notebook. It's spelt Jupyter. Just to be a bit different. They've all got to be a bit different. And there's other tools I'm learning about in the Alberto Cairo course at the moment. There's Flourish, which is a new data viz tool, and that's a freemium model. So the basic model is pretty good. You can get a lot out of it for no money, which is good. And he just also took another one called Insight, which is INZIGHT, comes from New Zealand. That's another one you can use. And the basic charting tool that we use at the ABC is Data Wrapper.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is a journal, I think.
And so when you're like learning these things through these courses, is that something that you can easily integrate into what you're doing at the ABC, or?
Yeah, I've made it my kind of goal at the end of every course to try and learn to try and use what I've learnt in my work.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been really useful. I'd hope to expand into R soon, because I haven't used R very much, but that's another tool for analysis as well.
Yeah, cool.
But it's really just a matter of, I think, with a lot of this stuff, just having a go. And you'll find that some things come really easily to you and make sense, and then others you might go, I'm not really sure. Like Tableau is another one that's free as well, but I find that a bit kind of clunky, a bit confusing to use, so I haven't done that much in it, but there's so much stuff out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you, on the other hand, have been basically kind of making it up as you go along?
Yeah, I don't use any of those tools, but I'd love to know how. Mostly my data journalism is basically inputting things into Excel, or if there's a data set, like a government data set, I usually trawl through that a couple of times a week, and then I'll pull things out and use that to tell a story. Trawled through one about pokey losses, gambling losses, and found out that I think 2017 was the biggest year in Queensland for pokey losses. Yeah. But yeah, basically just Excel and Infogram is as far as I've got so far.
And so what's the attitude from your like colleagues, I guess particularly, you know, I guess a lot of your colleagues are probably ex-newspaper people. How do they react to the kind of data work that you do? Do they appreciate it, or do they think it's like, I don't know?
Weird, no. Yeah, everyone is like really, really excited, and everyone sort of wants to have a go. And even if they're not really sort of familiar with Infogram, people will be like, hey, I've got this really cool data set, like what can I do with it? And I'll be like, oh yeah, actually, if you put that and set aside some time and have a look at it. Not that I'm like the expert or anything, but yeah, everyone's super supportive. Sometimes not at my work, but you'll talk to someone and they'll say like, oh, data is really scary and I don't know maths and that kind of thing. And I don't think anything that I do has anything to do with maths at all. You get Excel to do that for you. So, but yeah, like completely supportive, and they give lots of feedback about things as well, things they like. I learnt early on that people don't like pie charts, especially really complex pie charts. So yeah, steer away from pie charts. Yeah.
And would you say that about the ABC as well, that like everyone's kind of?
Yeah.
Because I feel like, you know, my experiences in the ABC was that like everyone wanted to do it, but then they wouldn't necessarily always have like the perfect story that lined up with the kind of like visualization that they wanted to do. Yeah,
unfortunately, the reality of what, you know, the data set that you have or the story that you're trying to tell, it might not stack up once you try to actually get into it. So, I mean, with that stuff, again, I would just talk to the people on my team about whether they think that's going to work as a biz. Yeah. But generally, I found that when I've kind of waded into all this stuff, I do find that people are really supportive in the data viz community. Yeah. And yeah, it's spreading, which is great.
And so, what about like audience feedback? What do you find gets the kind of best feedback from audiences? I don't know, do you have a story that's been particularly successful?
We're doing this experiment in my team at the moment called Chart of the Day, where we're all trying to, we rotate it through the team and we each do a chart. It's an article with a chart in it made with Data Wrapper, and so the two rules are you have to use Data Wrapper and the text that accompanies it has to be 100 words or fewer. So I did one recently that was using ABS census data, looking at the gender breakdown of the top 30 professions in Australia. And with that kind of thing, you're just never really sure how it's going to go, but this one did pretty well. So I got some good feedback on that. I think a lot of it had to do with, you know, it was a subject that a lot of people could relate to, but also the chart itself kind of look nice, which is, I think, part of the appeal of getting people to actually have a look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the thinking behind keeping it below like 100 words?
Just really just to be short and snappy, yeah, and to let the chart kind of speak for itself, and it keeps it makes it more doable for a daily rotation as well. If if you have to tell the story in 100 words, and it really can't be a complex chart, and it can't take you too long to do. That's the idea.
Yeah, and it's about the chart of the day, I suppose. Yeah.
So the feedback on that kind of format's been really good. Yeah. So Simon's driven that thing.
Felicity, can you think of any examples that have like the audience has really gotten into that you've done, or that Fairfax has done in general?
I was trying to think of one. I did one on Uber and the value of taxi licenses over time, and that's been something that's been debated a lot in politics. Uber's impact on taxis, and so I got this value over time. It had the whole date rather than the month and the year, so I kind of had to create a different column. I don't know if there's a better way of doing that, but I did it by hand. And then it showed Uber came in, there was a massive fall in the value of taxi licenses. So in terms of sort of getting a lot of hits on that story, I think it was probably the headline that drew people in, which was like this chart shows exactly when Uber killed taxis in Brisbane.
Yep.
And then through getting people into the actual story, and they could see the point in time, and you can sort of say like, look, this is the time when it came in. We had a lot of comments, and it's an issue that really gets people talking. I followed up that one with it was interesting because you get the value in different locations. So I looked at different places around Queensland where there hadn't actually been Uber yet, and the value did drop in those places as well. Okay. So I was able to kind of get two stories out of the same data set to say it's killing taxis in the regional cities as well. Yeah, even though they don't have Uber yet.
How do you check the authenticity of your data collection?
Well, this was Queensland government data. So this was Transport and Main Roads, where they had the sale value. Okay. So I was relying on Transport and Main Roads really to be accurate, which I hope that they would be.
I might throw it open to the audience for some questions in a second, but just before I do that, just thought I would ask one final one from me. What is the one tip or piece of advice you'd give to a journalist who wants to get into data journalism and needs to know where to start?
As Felicity said, I was also really reluctant to. I didn't have confidence in my mathematical ability, and that was kind of holding me back for quite a while. And I can only assume that it's pretty common as well. A lot of people seem to kind of find maths pretty difficult at school, and then it has a knock-on effect that they think they're just not good at it. But I would just say you'll surprise yourself once you start having a go at it, I think. I did. Yeah. So I would just say give it a go, and just keep, as I said, looking for different tools and different packages that suit you, different ways of doing it that suit you.
What about you?
I was going to say a very similar thing. Give it a go. That's what I did. I wouldn't necessarily call myself a data journalist, probably a journalist who uses data. Some days I'm probably more of a data journalist than other days. Yeah. But just to give it a go. And with Excel being self-taught, Google is really helpful, I've found, I'm trying to work out how to do this thing in Excel, and there's no one I can really ask. There might be people I can ask, but they're probably really busy. Yeah. I just Google how to get some of something in Excel, how to make this thing work for me. And there's a lot of, just Excel websites where they just teach you how to do various things. Yeah,
that's a great tip for not just Excel, but any kind of tool that you're trying to use, or language or anything like that, just Google.
I think there's probably thousands of people before me who've had the exact same question. Yeah,
and I think the kind of ethos is to kind of help people as well when they're starting to learn. So there's a lot of websites out there with people who are just kind of ready to give advice on the different problems that pop up. So.